And here is Mr. Matt Bennett, who's a pioneer in the field of trauma-informed care, the co-founder of Optimal Heart Rate Variability and president of the nonprofit Optimal Innovation Group. With a master's degree in psychology and business administration, Matt has combined his expertise as a therapist and leader to develop innovative, research-based solutions that improve the health and well-being of individuals, organizations, and systems. He's the author of several books, including his most recent Heart Rate Variability, The Future of Trauma-Informed Care, which explores the intersection of trauma recovery and HRV as a tool for measuring post-traumatic growth. Matt's also the host of the HRV podcast, where he continues to share insights on how HRV can shape the future of trauma care. His work is deeply rooted in understanding the impact of trauma and offering science-based approaches to healing and growth. So welcome, Matt, to the Victim to Victor podcast. How are you doing?
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I absolutely love your joyful energy. Are you always like this?
Hey, I get to talk about healing and post-traumatic growth and the nervous system. A few of my favorite things, so I'm excited.
Beautiful. I absolutely love that. And you're on your way to a conference this week as well. So you're very busy.
Yeah, the International Society of Neuroregulation Research, and that's a mouthful. So a bunch of nervous system, brain, autonomic nervous system nerds talking about health, wellness, and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I just love those events. You just get to meet so many intelligent and cool people.
Very, very intelligent and very cool people. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's humbling to go to some of these because what others know just kind of reminds you what you still have to learn. So which is I always enjoy that process.
Me too, me too. Because they say, don't they, like if you're the most intelligent in a room, then you're in the wrong room.
Exactly. Yeah. Plus, what I've learned now that I'm getting older is everybody thinks they're the most intelligent person in the room. So if you're like, maybe I'm third or fourth and just listen to other people, they seem to like you. So that was my skill to get to where I'm at in my career. That I'll be the third or fourth smartest person. So
I love that. Yeah. So please do tell my listeners about yourself and your career.
Yeah, so I started out working with youth that were in either the criminal justice system or the foster care system. So often get labeled at-risk youth and their families. Is where I started my career out. Started as a counselor and then got my master's degree in counseling psychology. So was a therapist. Quickly, I was lucky enough early on in my career to get hired to run a homelessness and housing program for youth. So I sort of shifted from the clinical side to trying to heal through programming, stability, safety for these youth. Along the way, I went back and got my master's in business administration because I had no idea how to be a leader. I was just doing therapy with all my staff because that's what I was trained to do, and it wasn't working incredibly well. So I've really had a fascination with how to, therapeutic approaches. Like I guess I'm kind of known. I've written the book on trauma-informed motivational interviewing. So that is a passion of mine, but also the leadership, staff, resiliency, and wellness too. So just kind of as I evolved in my career, started working in healthcare, ran a school for special education, a lot of work in addiction. And then around 2003, I saw the adverse childhood experience for the first time. And for the first time in my career, and I'm a big nerd, by the way, I'm going to the International Society of Neuroregulation Research. That is me. I will out myself is I always was frustrated before the adverse childhood experience studies. What's the why behind the behavior? What's the why behind the struggles? And as I saw the ACE study, the answer clearly became trauma. It was at least a contributing factor, if not the main factor behind these struggles. So back in 2003, not a whole lot of people were talking about trauma. It was sort of a new, it was in sort of corners of conferences, but not anywhere that was being talked about from the main stage. so to speak. So I just started talking about it. And I guess I got okay at talking about it because people have flown me all over to talk about it, which is a huge honor. So once I get passionate about something, I never shut up about it. So read a few books about it, and just really tried to spread the word on the impact of trauma and what we could do to support post-traumatic growth. The recent chapter of my story is around 6 or 7 years ago, I started really getting into the Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory, Van Kolk, the body keeps score. We're really starting to focus on this autonomic nervous system. What we know about trauma in the brain totally transformed how I think about, therapeutic work, healing myself. Learned so much along the way. But then polyvagal theory, we're talking about the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system and how that's impacted by trauma. And then, heart rate variability, I start to hear this term thrown around as a way to measure your body's ability to handle or recover from stress. So as you know, trauma is the most intense stress we can experience. So my whole career, whether I'm working with staff on their own resiliency, health and wellness, or working to help people heal, was around that healthy nervous system, that stress system, be it in the brain or be it in the autonomic nervous system. So I tried, there were a few HRV, heart rate variability apps out there. Most of them were on for like elite athletes. Nobody was really in the mental health space in an affordable way, because I didn't want to create another health inequity where only rich people could get biometrics like Apple Watch and those expensive devices. So yeah, Optimal HRV about 4 or 5 years ago, and I have been able to partner with some amazing people along the way. And so now the world does have a very affordable way to measure your mental health and your resiliency. And my passion from my trauma background is, how do we measure post-traumatic growth? How do we know we're making progress? And so this next stage of my career, I've focused a lot on sort of bringing this technology into the trauma world.
Oh, I love that. And I just feel like you're just hitting home on some really important points there, because you're right. Trauma, it even though we've been so tuned into tackling trauma through, obviously, therapy, talking therapy, but the body keeps the score. It's all
Yeah.
about healing the body. And I love how you're combining science into that as well. So for my listeners who may be unfamiliar with heart rate variability, if they haven't done their degrees in science, can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, so let's start out with the simple definition: your body's ability to handle or recover from stress. And again, trauma being the most intense form of stress that we can do. So we have this brilliant autonomic nervous system. I was a brain nerd. As soon as I saw the ACE study, I had to learn like a crash course, which turned into a multi-year decade obsession right now about learning about the brain. But we have this brilliant nervous system that starts around the brain stem here and goes all the way down throughout our body. It's called the autonomic nervous system. While the brain gets all the glory, the autonomic nervous system is in charge of 80% of our body's function. You don't think to have your heartbeat or to take a breath normally, right? Your blood pressure, your digestion, all that's autonomic nervous system, right? And so, it's in the background, it's unconscious, but it's doing most of the work to keep us alive. And this autonomic nervous system has two parts. It's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system. Now, the parasympathetic is highly connected to something called the ventral vagal nerve. Now, this is called the wandering nerve. It goes all throughout our body. It's entangled in pretty much every system that we have on that. And what we call the ventral vagal sits on top of the chest, kind of Stephen Porges calls it our safe and social. So it really regulates our heart rate, regulates our breathing. And if we're in a calm, cognitively engaged, focused, relaxed state, we're in a high vagal tone, as we call it. That won't be on the test, but if you've heard that term, we got strong ventral vagal activation. So that's one part of the parasympathetic. We also have the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve. Basically, I'm saying all these terms just to show I did my homework. Again, it won't be on the test. And that's often associated with the freeze response that your listeners are probably familiar in, which is kind of the emergency brake that if I can't run away or fight back, we can go into that freeze response. The other part of the autonomic nervous system is the sympathetic, which is responsible for the fight or flight response. Now, I don't want to be always just labeled the worst things about myself, like I'm goofy, I'm tall, I'm lanky. Like I want to like the sympathetic, often we just say it's the fight or flight part of the nervous system, but it's so much more than that. If your sympathetic stops working, you're dead. Like it keeps your heart going, it keeps your lungs going. So it's a very central part of that autonomic nervous system. And then there's this beautiful dance between that ventral vagal part of the parasympathetic and the autonomic. And so if we didn't have the ventral vagal, that vagal tone, we would walk around like, if you could imagine, and I'm too old to do this, but you look younger than I am, so you may be able to do it. If you would sprint as hard as you could for 100 yards, and you could imagine the state you're in after that, without the ventral vagal nerve, that's how you would walk around life. And just imagine trying to go to work in that state, be a parent in that state, be in a relationship. I mean, it'd be absolutely chaotic. You could barely catch your breath to get your words out. So every time we inhale, or excuse me, every time we exhale, we put that ventral brake on that sympathetic activation. So what we see is that ventral vagal brake comes in, slows the heart rate down. Then on the inhale, that ventral brake removes, and then we get an increase in heart rate. We exhale, we lower the heart rate. So this is where the variability, your heart doesn't go like a metronome. A lot of people think we're in the time of computers and fancy cars. We want everything to work to precision, but we are organic, and organic, that variability, and we're talking about milliseconds of variability. So not big, but that differentiation in heart rate really shows, yes, we have the energy from our sympathetic to live our best life, but we have that emotional regulation. We have that ability for cognitive engagement. If I'm emotionally regulated, I can socially connect with other people. So it gives us, heart rate variability gives us a sign that, yes, our nervous system is doing well. We know a high heart rate variability, which is actually good. Lower resting heart rate is good, but if you have less beats per minute, there's more room for variation if you want to put those two science together. But if I have higher heart rate variability, I know I got that prefrontal cortex, the thinking, future thinking, emotional regulation. My amygdala, that pesky anxiety, stress part of my brain is well regulated. In other words, I can bring my best self into my life. As I get stressed, what we see is heart rate goes up, HRV starts to drop, showing that my body is struggling to handle or recover from stress.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, you're really hitting home on some really important points there when it comes to stress, the stress caused by trauma. And it is the number one killer. And
absolutely.
and so how are you actually out there now, delivering all your wisdom and your knowledge? Are you doing it on a large scale? Just as
So well, we're international, so it's fun now. Previously with my work around trauma, MI, I've been here in the States from Hawaii to Puerto Rico to every piece, but internationally, just I don't know, for some reason I've just stayed within the borders. But here with HRV, it is I get to talk to people from all over the world almost on a weekly basis, which is great fun. So one, I'm working with great experts, Dr. Ina Hazan, Dr. David Hopper in this field. So it's really trying to spread the word, because if you think about what trauma does to what we just described, we know people, and I always make sure I say untreated trauma, because as you exist today to help spread the news, is that trauma can heal in beautiful ways called post-traumatic growth, which is always my favorite words to say out loud. But we know with trauma, what we get is higher activity in the sympathetic. So we see lower heart rate variability. So what I'm working with people to do as we measure people's progress, whether it's an individual engaging on their own, or whether I'm working with a trauma-informed yoga instructor or a chiropractor or trauma-informed therapist, helping somebody see that therapy or other wellness health practices are helping to improve their heart rate variability over time. So we can actually measure that. The other really exciting thing about this science of heart rate variability is we also can use it for biofeedback practice.
Nice.
We all have a specific breathing rate that peaks that vagal tone that allows our HRV to really spike. Now, you don't want to go around doing that all the time. It's like going to the gym, right? It's a training rate. So if I wanted to get big biceps, which I obviously don't have, I would go to the gym and do reps. I wouldn't walk around all day, every day with weights, or I would hurt myself very quickly. So we've got this training rate for biofeedback practice somewhere between 4 breaths per minute and 7 breaths per minute. And it's very individualized for the person. Nothing's good or bad about one score over the other, but you have a unique breathing rate. For example, mine is 4.5. So when we practice at that rate, we really like taking that ventral vagal to the gym. Now you can do that with mindfulness or self-compassion practice, but our app also has the ability to get that breathing rate, and then you can practice that breathing rate. And for me as a therapist, in my past work, it's like the greatest homework we could ever give someone, because thanks to the ACE study, I know what I'm working on is to help to heal that neurological wound left over by trauma, obviously the psychological wound as well. So I'm helping to heal that. Well, if I can give somebody homework to go through and really strengthen some of the aspects of the nervous system that we know were most damaged by trauma, again, they're working to support what I'm doing in session with it. So again, the research and the science around this is just overwhelmingly, I think, positive and exciting, and a ton of hope out there for the future.
Amazing, yeah. And so is this an app that can be readily downloadable by anybody?
Yep, we're in the app stores, so you can download it. We try to keep, memberships run from like $9 a month. If you go to annual membership, I think it's like $65 US. So, we try to keep it very affordable for folks. You got to have a device too. We sell very inexpensive device, but if you have a polar strap or other thing sitting around, those will work as well. So we wanted just to make this really accessible to as many people as possible, while making sure we get accurate data, because sometimes you can err on the side that, you can use the camera on your phone, but getting accurate readings off of that is just really difficult. So we have dedicated ourselves really sticking to the science as much as possible. So so it's a pretty inexpensive startup, and then the memberships are a few pennies a day at that to get the benefits of both tracking, again, progress and health over time, but also using the biofeedback and heart rate variability training as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And because part of my traumatology training involves assessments, which we do, and those assessments are they determine distress levels. So, we use like SUD scales, for example, but I just feel like this could integrate quite nicely with that.
Amen. Yeah. Well, you think about, because assessments have their place, and there's no, I've used them, we all have our favorites, so there's no argument against assessment, but just think if you could get a reading on how their autonomic nervous system is functioning. And the real cool thing about HRV now is, and why I'm here today, is about up until a few years back, you had to go to a laboratory like an MRI. You had to go to a laboratory to get it. Now, we have these little wrist strap devices that cost under $50 US, and are really easy to use and give you really good data. So then you could track progress over time as well. So is your intervention working? If you could get a 5-day baseline on somebody, you'd really get great information about that the health of their nervous system, with, again, the ultimate goal is showing increase in HRV, increase in nervous system autonomic health, increase in that stress response over time. So it's something that gets us underneath the skin in a way that surveys just don't always do by their nature. Again, I'm not in any way saying we need to throw the assessments out the window by any stretch, but what a way to supplement those assessments to get really biometric data. It's like you go to you're a medical provider and they take your vital signs. Like, this is the vital sign for mental health. They may ask you how you're doing. You may say fine, but they take your blood pressure and realize, nope, you're not, or your heart rate is way wacky, So now we can do the same thing in mental health that our physicians, our medical providers have done since I've been going. They take those vital signs. Here's one, and the great thing about this one is you can do it every day, so you get much better information clinically to see progress, because what works for one person you might need to tweak for another person. So what works for you might not work for me, or I may need a different approach with that. And so it gives us a really nice way to measure that. Again, if the person can get in the habit of it, getting that daily information can really be critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have any like real case scenarios of where it's really benefited people?
Yeah, so a lot of our clinical users now tell us that people that, and not everybody's into this, not everybody's into the biometrics, but the people that seemingly are really invested in their health and wellness, and their trauma work is part of that. Seem to be they like to see that, I'm investing this money and going to a therapist, and I see that it's working. So it allows therapists, and we give therapists access to a dashboard where they can track people's progress over time as well. And the individual can do that through the app. So really looking at, that, I'm making progress in this. So if I do journaling or if I do mindfulness, I can really see the impact on my home. So we see it with me in motivational interviewing. I think a lot about motivation. For a lot of us, we want data. We want to see that, yes, this is really working, and that I'm doing things to get healthier. So that with the case examples, it's somebody who has gotten that sort of motivation enough to come see a clinician in whatever way, shape, or form that's connected. And we work with a range of healthcare professionals, but let's just say a trauma therapist, really giving them some education. It opens doors to talk about their nervous system and trauma's impact on it. And for those that are interested, a way to really track in services. Some people like to pre and post test their counseling or therapy sessions with people. And sometimes at the end is actually worse, because trauma treatment's really hard work. For both the therapists, but also obviously for the heroes that are going through the healing process and are doing that. So we just see that the big piece of feedback we get is it quantifies it, not just for the therapist, but for the clients as well, so they can track their own experience. And one of the interesting things that I never thought I would talk about as a therapist is other wellness strategies too, because I never talked about things like sleep, nutrition, and movement. But what creates a healthy nervous system? If I were to rank the top three, it would probably be sleep number one. It's kind of hard. They're all kind of tied for first. Sleep, movement, and not eating a whole bunch of inflammatory foods, right? Because all that creates inflammation. All that is dysregulated. I think my fourth there would be, or what's tied for second would be, mindfulness or breathing practice. But now, as I like to say, as somebody, if I'm doing trauma therapy and I'm not talking about those, there's a ceiling on how much I can help somebody. Now, I can still do a lot of good, don't get me wrong. But if they're not getting good sleep, if they're sedentary, if they're, eating the standard American diet, which is highly inflammatory, that's working against, that's dysregulating the nervous system I'm trying to heal. So having those conversations, it opens the door up to those conversations with people, because a lot of times the ACE study told us, untreated trauma can lead to a range of health risk behaviors like smoking, maybe drinking too much, drug use, a lot of addiction to technology. All these things we know have data behind them for trauma. And so we can really then open up those conversations as not just post-traumatic growth, but living a better, more fulfilled life as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. And lifestyle does play one of the biggest factors, you know, if we're
It's
not
yeah.
healthy in our body, how are we going to have a healthy mind?
That's what it if you think about the mind as an emergent
Mm.
phenomenon, which it's a controversy. You get into the conference I go to, I like to ask people, does the human mind really exist? And it leads to hours of conversation because I believe it does exist, by the way, but it emerges from this nervous system, right? If the brain stops working, the mind probably isn't. At least we don't have hard evidence that maybe something goes up afterwards. I'm kind of hoping it does, but it emerges from this. Our moods emerge from the nervous system. Now we do have, if you believe in the mind, some ability and control over that, or to change our thought patterns or catch our stress level rising. But regardless, it's emerging from the physical nervous system. So just gives us a way to get in there. And if you're inflaming that nervous system and inflaming that body, the mind that emerges from that, again, more likely to be emotionally dysregulated, cognitive, that fogginess, that sort of thing, and even trouble in social relationships, because if you're emotionally dysregulated, you're not going to be the best partner in whatever type of relationship we're
True.
talking about.
Wow. Yeah, very true. Yeah. And so, how about your books then? God, you've written a lot. So, could you explain a bit more about your books for my listeners?
Yeah, so Connecting Paradigm was my first, and it keeps #1 on the list of bestsellers. So it's
Yeah.
my trauma-informed motivational interviewing book. So if your listeners are not familiar, motivational interviewing is sort of the gold standard for behavioral change.
Mm.
And I really realized that when we work with folks with especially complex or compound trauma, they're just starting from a different place. There is that different nervous system, the personal narratives that evolve from repeated trauma. It's not like me being adherent to my medication. There's other things going on there, re-traumatization. So I really took the great work of Miller and Rolnick, who's done a fabulous job developing motivational interviewing, and just bringing that trauma-informed lens on top of it. So I'm working on the 10th anniversary edition, which in my own mind means I've sold enough copies that's worth time doing. So it's been fun to watch that. Again, another thing that's gone around the world with that. And so the other ones, I've written a book with my wife, who's a second grade teacher, on trauma sensitive early education. There wasn't really a book written from a teacher's perspective for how we integrate trauma informed principles into the school setting. So I was like, I kind of write books if there's not something out there. I don't write the book that's going to sell a lot of copies, but I write a book to sort of, hey, if a first grade or second grade or early education teacher is interested in how to integrate this into the classroom, they need a book. And so we wrote that book. And then the heartbeat of business is I had a bunch of business leaders. The interesting thing about doing this work is I get the folks who are struggling the most, and then I get the elite athletes. And so we have, sports teams that win national championships and world championships. We have special force military operators, and we work in shelters for folks experiencing homelessness. So that's sort of the range of this, because HRV, about how my body handles or recovers from stress. We know if you want to perform at your best, if your nervous system is not doing well, you're not going to bring your best cognitive or physical self to what's going on as well. So I had a bunch of business people call me up and say, this would work in our field as well. And I kind of got tired of telling them I had an MBA. So I just wrote a book for them. And I wrote that with my partner, Dr. Ina Hassan, Dr. David Hopper. So it was a fun process. And then my book, Heart Rate Variability, The Future of Trauma-Informed Care, is really taking this and asking kind of this conversation is, how do we integrate this in? More and more people, again, Van der Kolk kind of opened the door. Porges and polyvagal theory has become incredibly popular. But how do we use this in a practical way? How do we look at these numbers? How do we work with this and integrate this into our services. So that was the real passion behind that book as well.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on your success and
Thank
your
you.
your podcast as well. So what kind of things do you talk about on your podcast?
So I'm lucky enough to have found myself in the realm of the world experts on this topic.
Wow.
Again, that what wasn't out there, a podcast just talking about heart rate variability. So we jumped right into that, and thanks to I don't know, just the great community around this is. I get to talk to, like, if you think in psychology, you got the Freuds, the Jungs, all those kind of old heads, who we look back at and like as the fathers. For heart rate variability, these folks are still walking around. There's a lot of the founders. Stephen Porges is a great example. That's 1960, he started his career working in heart rate variability,
Wow.
So I got to meet him at one of these nerdy conferences, which was a huge thrill. But I get to interview these folks and kind of document their stories, but also document what their research they're working on now, pushing that envelope forward. So yeah, it's been, I never kind of set out to say, oh, we're going to be documenting a lot of the history around this, but it's been a fun process to be able to connect with and call them now friends, these brilliant minds in this field. So yeah, if your audience is interested, I think we've published like 170 plus episodes at this point. So go in and pick your favorite topic. I give you permission. You don't have to go back to episode 1. Just go in and pick, because I'm researching one of the top 5 experts in the world on that subject, which is really, it's just an honor. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, and I will be adding all the links to your books and your podcast on this episode. And so what's your vision now for the future?
Well, it's to get the word out about heart rate variability. I feel like I'm back in 2003 and I just learned about the ACE study. And I'm like, everybody that will give me 5 minutes or a workshop or a full day, I'm going to talk to anybody that wants to hear about this, because again, it just wasn't out there. And I just saw it as just your podcast documents and it's so important to get this message out, because to me, adverse childhood experience is a horrible thing. Trauma is a horrible thing. There's so much hope that we can offer people now. So I kind of feel like I'm reliving those times with heart rate variability, of sort of saying, hey, guess what? We can actually measure this now. We can get that out there. We can use the biofeedback to help heal, be part of that post-traumatic growth process. So it's really kind of, I feel like I've gone back, but I love that, being on the forefront of something and bringing it into the trauma world, and maybe a way it wasn't. There were some good people doing great work. Like, again, when Stephen Porges is talking about it, I can't say I'm the only one there, because one of my heroes has been talking, and others, but it just kind of to bring solutions into that. Yeah, as Vanderkolk can talk about heart rate variability, but there wasn't, when he wrote Body Keeps Score, there wasn't really a good way to track that and use that without going to a laboratory setting. So it's great to be, I joked with my team, I thought I was maybe 5 years ahead of the curve, and maybe 10 years would have been better, but it's good to spread this knowledge out there as another way to hopefully support the healing and transformational processes.
Beautiful. Yeah, you're just doing a fantastic job, and I just love your energy.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the venue to talk about this, especially doing the work that you're doing. It's always an honor. So this is one of the ways I appreciate the format, to get the word out. And there's other apps out there now too, but to get this on people's radar, I think is so important. I think biofeedback is going to become more and more what we do. We can bring the science, we can measure these things. Neurofeedback's taking big jumps. The good thing about biofeedback when we talk about HRV is, you don't need to spend $10,000 on equipment anymore.
Exactly.
You can, and it gives you $10,000 worth of data for sure. But this is becoming something, maybe one of your listeners, if they're a professional working with people, hey, you can implement this for, again, pennies a day.
Yeah.
You're not putting a burden on yourself or your
Mm,
clients to get this tool out there. So
yeah.
that's my hope, is that this will get more and more a part of our world with trauma, and become a really support that healing that we're all striving to help support
Oh,
people.
yeah, yeah, no, it is. And, I just feel like anything that we can utilize on a daily basis, such as like, a very cost-effective app like the Optimal HRV, then it's a no-brainer,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I think so
perfect.
too. That's my whole
Yes.
theory of this. So
It is.
it's my hope that, again, once people learn about it and try it on themselves too. I mean,
Mm,
we were in a field that experiences probably above average, depending on where you're at in this
yeah.
field. Above average or high burnout. So
Mm,
to me, I'm really fascinated, and when I think in the future is, you know how well regulated is the therapist going into the session.
yeah.
We can really start to ask questions, as our technology gets better and better, really see the therapeutic process play out in different ways, including our own impact of our own
Mm,
health and wellness, which
that's a big
yeah,
one.
we're dysregulated, so it
Yeah,
doesn't.
it's just, well, the daily triggers, I just feel like it
Yeah,
would be a fantastic way to keep on top of that and to,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
to not be so
Yeah.
triggered. So, oh, an absolute delight to have you on, and good luck on your conference this week.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the great work that you do getting the word out. Let me be a very small part of your important work. So keep it up. We need all the voices out there
You
that we
do.
can get, because paradigm shifts don't happen in just 20 years. They take a long time. And this is
Yeah.
where now we really have to, like, okay, we understand this. How do we implement this? And that's where I appreciate you and your voice. So keep
Oh,
doing what you're doing.
thank you. I will do. It's been an absolute honor having you on, Matt. Thank you so much, and keep shining your light, my friend.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Take care.